Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing my top 10 San Jose Sharks prospects. I've seen a couple of posts about this topic recently, and I thought, why not throw my own hat into the ring? And we start off with the honorable mentions here, which I think is a very interesting portion of this list because I view the Sharks as having kind of a top 9 group of prospects right now, where the ordering within that top 9 is up for debate, but the players there are relatively set. However, when it comes to actually nailing down who's that 10th best prospect, that's where you begin to really be splitting hairs, and you could honestly make an argument for a bunch of different players, and that's where these honorable mentions do come in. Starting off with Cam Lund, he had a few really good years in the NCAA and made the jump to the NHL this past season. He managed to score a couple of goals, but otherwise I don't think had a truly inspiring performance necessarily. That perhaps is to be expected. The Sharks obviously were terrible at the end of this past season, so it's certainly not Lund's fault, and on top of that, the jump from college to the NHL is not an easy thing to do right out of the gate. But with that being said, he will likely begin next year with the San Jose Barracuda, and the hopes is that he will have that kind of Colin Graf style of development where he starts the year with the CUDA, he does very well, makes the jump to the NHL at the midway point, and we go from there. But I'm not fully ready to predict that this will definitely happen for Cam Lund, and so he just barely misses the cutoff for that top 10 position. Then we have Jack Thompson. He's a defenseman I'm not super high on. I think he has the possibility of being like a number 6, maybe number 5 guy in the NHL, but probably not much more than that. However, the good news for him is that because he plays a position that the Sharks desperately do need, which is a right-handed defenseman, San Jose is likely to give him the room to grow over the next year, over the next couple of years, but I'm not sure if there's much upside here, which is why I have him as that honorable mention. Then we have Ethan Cardwell, who's actually one of my favorite Sharks prospects within their system, but if we are being realistic, likely caps out more as a fourth line winger. This is still an important position to have, obviously, if you truly want to make an impact in the NHL and get all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals and compete for that trophy. You don't just need the guys at the top of your lineup doing well, but also the guys at the bottom, even if they're only playing 6, 7, 8 minutes. And in 3 to 4 years' time, I could see Ethan Cardwell being that type of player, but the Sharks prospect pool is so deep that a fourth line guy is not quite enough to cut that top 10. Then we have Danil Gushchin. I don't even know if Gushchin will still be on the team within the next couple of months. It's possible that the Sharks don't re-sign him. It's possible that he decides to just leave himself. But if he is, there's arguments to be in that top 10 position. And then the other guys like Joey Muldowney or Leo Celine Wallenius, I could certainly see being in that position. But I ultimately decided on Sharks defensive prospect Erik Polkamp. He has been playing in the NCAA for the last couple of seasons and has looked really, really good. Came in as a freshman with Bemidji State. Obviously, it's not a BC or a BU, but he was under the radar, one of the better defensemen at that time, even though he was just a college freshman. So good, in fact, that he ended up getting picked up by Denver University for his sophomore season, the team that was the defending champions of the NCAA, and he helped them get pretty far in the playoffs once again this season. He wasn't quite their number 1 guy. Obviously, Zeev Buium filled in that role, but he still played a pretty important position. And now with Zeev Buium having signed his NHL contract with Minnesota Wild, it is expected that heading into his junior year, he could end up being that top pairing, very important player on a good Denver program. So he'll be someone to keep an eye on if he can continue this upward trajectory for himself. While I don't think he necessarily has top pairing upside in the NHL, maybe a middle pairing position could be in his future, and that to me is just barely enough to get him above some of these other honorable mentions. And I should also point out that because this is his junior year, the Sharks will likely pursue a contract at the end of this season, and with him being a right-handed defenseman, we could see an NHL debut as soon as like March or April by this upcoming year. Then we move on to number 9 on this list, where we have Philip Bystedt. He brings a lot of stability to the Sharks prospect pool. You know you're probably not getting like a top 6 player out of him, but you likely will end up with a bottom 6 type of guy. He certainly has the build and the makeup as a player to be a fourth liner, maybe even a third liner in the NHL. He had his first full season in North America this year where it went okay. Obviously, he probably could have liked it to go better, but it was mired with inconsistencies. He had some great games, he had some not so great games, and that certainly carried in to the playoffs with the Barracuda. They played a total of 6 games. I'd say in about 3, maybe 4 of them, he was really solid, but in the other 2 or 3, he was not so great. And so I'm not sure if it's enough to actually get him into the NHL as soon as next season, but within the next couple of years, I could absolutely see it. And the thing to me that makes the difference why he is above a player like Cam Lund or Ethan Cardwell, who maybe project out in the same type of position, is the fact that Philip Bystedt is a centerman, and that is more valuable, especially consistently in that bottom six. Having a really good fourth line center is harder to come by than a solid fourth line winger, and so he does end up in that number 9 spot. At number 8, we have Kasper Heltinen, going from a more certainty to a lot more uncertainty here. This is a player who in 3 to 4 years' time we could be talking about as like a 30-goal scorer, dangerous player on the ice for the Sharks on the power play, and in 3 to 4 years' time, we could be talking about him as like a guy who just never could quite crack it in the NHL. And the reason for this is that he has one skill that just stands out above pretty much everything else that he is capable of, which is his shot. Perhaps the best in the OHL, perhaps even the best in the entire CHL. He is just an absolute weapon on the power play or even at even strength when given some room on the ice. At the World Juniors with Team Finland, teams had to go into their matchup against Finland with plans on the penalty kill to cover for him in that position, or they knew that given the one-timer chance, he would likely put the puck in the back of the net. So they would design their penalty kill in trying to stop him from actually getting that clean shot off. That's how much of a threat he is. But the fact is that just having a really good shot is not really enough to crack it in the NHL. There have to be other aspects of your game that are at the very least pretty good. You don't want to just be a one-trick pony. I take a look at a player like Martin Frk. For those who have never maybe heard of him, he has just an absolute bullet of a shot. He set over 109 mile per hour shot at the AHL All-Star game a few years ago, but he doesn't offer much else besides that, and so he's basically been an AHL player for most of his career, only a handful of NHL games here or there. Heltinen doesn't want to fall into that position. The sort of good news, I'm not even sure if I can fully call it good news, is that this was something he had been working on this season with London. The thing is that his production, his actual numbers weren't great. He was only just barely over a point per game pace, and as a D+2 player in the OHL, that is not great, but he was trying to work on some of the other aspects here defensively, trying to get his skating to be at a higher level, also just trying to add a little bit of an edge to his game, have a bit of a mean streak, be more physical, which is something that we definitely did see through the playoffs for London in the OHL. So that could benefit him moving forward, especially since he does have some size to his game. He is 6'4", so there is a possibility that he could crack it more as a bottom six guy if he truly transitions his game to that, but you obviously want to see him pan out more so as a scorer, and it's kind of a hit or miss whether or not that does happen, and so he finds himself a little bit further down this list at number 8. Then we move on to number 7, another player who has some uncertainty to his game, Luca Cagnoni, defenseman here for the San Jose Barracuda, at least this past season, and he was absolutely fantastic production-wise. He put up some great numbers despite the fact that he came in as a 19-year-old. Sure, he turned 20 a couple months into the season, but still pretty young to be putting up the numbers that he did in a professional league. That was really great to see, and honestly, if Luca Cagnoni was like a 6'3" defenseman putting up production like this, you'd be talking about him as like a top 3, maybe even number 1 defensive prospect for the Sharks currently. But unfortunately, that's not the case. He is instead 5'9", which means the bar for him to clear is a good bit higher. There needs to be a high level of play for him to actually crack it in the NHL. Just this past season, there were only 11 defensemen who played at least 30 games who were either 5'9" or even 5'10". So there's not a ton of sample here, and that is because you do need to be a truly special type of talent. And it remains to be seen whether or not Cagnoni really is. Obviously, the production in the AHL was fantastic, but we saw him make the jump to the NHL at the end of this past season, and I thought this was a great thing to see. I wanted him to get this experience, and I think it will benefit him moving forward, but I was also hoping we'd see more flashes of brilliance offensively from Cagnoni, and we didn't quite get that. In particular, if you take a look on the power play, he was the power play quarterback for the San Jose Barracuda and helped lead them to the top power play unit in the entire AHL, but when put into a similar position in the NHL, he didn't really make much of an impact at all, and so it remains to be seen if he can truly be that difference maker in the NHL. And unlike someone like Heltinen, who could theoretically crack it as a bottom six guy just due to his size, it's hard to imagine Cagnoni being like a solid bottom pairing defenseman. However, the real difference maker and why I have Cagnoni above Heltinen even then is because their D+2 years could not be any further different. Haltonen, as I said, despite working on those other aspects of his game, still just offensively wasn't that great for a player in juniors, but D+2 for Cagnoni in a professional league, putting up the numbers that he did, that is very, very impressive. And so he's a player who I never really want to count out. He already proved at the beginning of the season when he not only was able to make it to the AHL, but put up the numbers that he did, that he is someone who is dedicated and should not be really bet against. But it remains to be seen if he truly has that full-on NHL upside. We shall see. At number 6, we have now Colin Graf. He is a very stable player within the San Jose Sharks prospect pool, one of the few who has actually had a decent amount of games in the NHL, not quite enough to not be eligible for this list. To me, he has not yet played a full season in the NHL, so I'll consider him here. But right now, he is a step above a lot of other Sharks players, even if he doesn't quite have a ton of upside. I don't really view Colin Graf as like a top-line player of the future for the Sharks, but I think he could fill in quite perfectly into a third-line role, which is still exceptionally important. Take a look at the Florida Panthers, who are in the Stanley Cup Finals currently against the Edmonton Oilers. Yeah, you think of Barkov and Reinhart and Tkachuk up front as the big name players, but the Florida Panthers don't get anywhere near the position that they are in without guys like Luostarinen or Rodriguez or Lundell putting in the strong work in a more third line, middle six type of position, being strong penalty kills, good defensively, and still contributing 30 to 40 points, which I think is where Colin Graf could land in. So not a ton of upside that cracks him yet into the top 5, though it remains to be seen. Perhaps he could be someone who could be a decent fill-in into a second line role at some point in the future, but still a key piece to the Sharks currently, looking really good this past season, or at least to end it off, and will probably be a full-timer next year. At number 5, we have Quentin Musty, and perhaps this will be viewed as slightly a surprise here, but this season, kind of a stagnant year for Quentin Musty. Didn't manage to make much progress, and to be fair, it's not really his fault. It was to be expected because he was a casualty of the NHL-CHL agreement, which meant that he could not play in the AHL. He was considered to be too young, so either he had to make it to the big leagues or he would be going back to juniors, and he was not quite ready to make it to the NHL. It's not really his fault necessarily. As a 19-year-old, it's quite difficult to crack it as a teenager in the NHL, so he went back to juniors, and he still didn't really do himself many favors there. Obviously, there was the injury. That's not easy to prevent. That kept him out for a couple of months, including the World Juniors, but he also sat out games at the beginning of the season when requesting a trade to be moved away from the Sudbury Wolves, and so he only ended up playing about half of the year. His production was still fantastic, but some of the strides that people were hoping to see in his game just didn't quite happen, and then he lost quite quickly in the playoffs with Sudbury, which kind of proved his point of why he wanted to be traded in the first place when they got swept 4-0. The good news is that Musty did have a strong finish, sort of, to his series, to his season, I should say, because it was almost a blessing in disguise to be eliminated so early on in the OHL playoffs, because he was able to make the jump to the San Jose Barracuda. He played a couple of games for them at the end of the season, but more importantly, he got into a playoff game. It's a small sample size of literally just one singular game. You don't usually want to read too deeply into one game, but he played against Colorado. It was game 2 of that second round playoff series, and I actually thought he looked rather solid, which sets up, I guess, a good feeling heading into the offseason and going into next year, which will be his first professional year of his career. It will probably be mostly with the San Jose Barracuda unless he has just an absolutely incredible preseason, but it makes it so you kind of have the faith that he can continue on this development path. He does have the upside to be a top 6 player and is, I would say, more of a sure thing, I guess you could say, compared to a player like Kasper Haltonen, which is why he does have this number 5 spot. And I would say the reason why he drops here to maybe number 5 in compared to where some other people would have him rated is because I'm more so high on who I have on number 4, which is Shakir Mukhamadullin. Coming into this season, I didn't necessarily think much of this particular player, especially since Will Smith and Celebrini would be on a top 10 list at the beginning of the year. I probably would have had Mukhamadullin like number 9, number 10, something like that. But this season, the 30 or so games that he played, just so extremely impressive. I felt both sides of the puck. Defensively, he looked really calm, cool, and collected in his own zone. In comparison to other young defensemen that the Sharks have, like Henry Thrun and Jack Thompson, it was like a night and day contrast. Just looked very much in control. And offensively, well, obviously we didn't see much where you think, oh yeah, this is going to be a 80 point per game type of player in the future. We did see enough that it feels as though he could pot 30 to 40 points. He had some strong offensive instincts of when to jump in from the blue line, moments where he would go right down the middle into the slot to get a chance, or even go pretty deep into the zone below the goal line and crashing the net to try and get an opportunity while still being able to get back for his defensive responsibilities. I really liked what we saw from Mukhamadullin. The only worry for him is that he started this past year with an injury and he also ended it with an injury, and obviously that could be something that could easily derail a player's career. Hopefully not the case, and he can come back stronger going into next season and manage to maintain his health for the entirety of the year, because I believe he probably has a penciled in top 4 position, at least at this moment, with San Jose, and I truly believe he can be not just a middle pairing guy, but like a strong number 3 capable of eating a ton of minutes in even key playoff situations. Then we get to the top 3 prospects, and at that third position I have who I believe to be the Sharks' best forward prospect currently. That is Igor Chernyshov. He was actually injured for a good portion of this season, missed the first few months, but then made his debut right at the end of January with the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL, and he was just a dominant force in the regular season. He put up a ton of points. There was a portion over the first month or so where he was at about 3 points per game. He still finished at the highest rate in a smaller sample size than most players, obviously, but still well over 2 points per game. His playoff performance wasn't great with Saginaw as they got bounced pretty quickly out of that first round, but again, like with Quentin Musty, almost a blessing in disguise because it allowed Chernyshov to make the jump to the San Jose Barracuda to catch a couple of games at the end of the season, and he also, again like Musty, was only given a single playoff game, but he looked really, really great in that one game. It was game 4, the final game that Barracuda had in the playoffs. Not only did he score their only goal, but he was probably one of their best players, making an impact almost every single time he stepped out on the ice, which gives a lot of hope that Chernyshov can not only be a solid, potentially even top 6 player, maybe even first liner for the Sharks in the future, but that he could potentially do that as soon as next season. Because one thing that does differ from Quentin Musty is that while Musty has not previously played professional hockey, Chernyshov actually has. During his draft year, he played a handful of games in the KHL, so he is sort of more used to this type of environment, I would say. And with him being an older player of the 2024 draft, a November birthday, meaning he would turn 20 relatively early on, he is a bit more further along than other 2024 draftees. And so I think there is a possibility he could crack it in the NHL as soon as next season. Whether or not it does happen, it's hard to say, but there is certainly a possibility. He has a ton of talent from what we had seen throughout his time in the OHL, as well as even with the Barracuda. Then we get to the top 2, and this is kind of where you could go either way. It seems to me Dickinson and Askarov are one step above the rest of the group as so important pieces for the San Jose Sharks within their system. You could have Askarov number 1, you could have Dickinson number 1. I ended up settling with Dickinson at number 1 for one major reason, which is that if both of these players are to hit their ceiling, Askarov likely ends up as like a top 7, top 5 goaltender. Dickinson would end up as a key top pairing defenseman who could eat a ton of minutes. Maybe not quite like a Norris winner 80-point guy, but someone in the realm of like a Alex Pietrangelo who is still very capable of carrying a team to Stanley Cups, in fact multiple Stanley Cups, both with the St. Louis Blues and with the Vegas Golden Knights. And to me, if they both reach that ceiling, Sam Dickinson as that top pairing defenseman would be more valuable than Askarov as a top 5 goaltender, because I think you can have success in the playoffs even if you don't have the best of the best goaltender. We see the Edmonton Oilers have made it to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals despite having a very average goalie who actually is incredibly inconsistent, like Stuart Skinner. As long as you have a great team in front of him, you can absolutely still manage to pick up some wins. But without a player like Dickinson leading your defensive core, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So that's truly the difference maker for me, why I have Dickinson at number 1. When it comes to Askarov, as I said, still a very important piece within the Sharks system, can be that top goalie who can steal you some games, which also has its own value. And we saw him be able to do that this season in the NHL. He had some fantastic outings. The one that really comes to mind is that game where he almost single-handedly managed to take out the Edmonton Oilers. Obviously, it fell short right at the end, but it was very close, and it was almost entirely off the back of Askarov's heroics in that game. But at the same time, we also saw some of the unpredictability in Askarov as a goaltender. He is a bit of an eccentric personality, and that shows in his game. there were also many moments in which he just simply was not as good. And it also shows in some of his skills as a player, in particular when it comes to his puck handling abilities. He loves to come out, play the puck, to try and be that important piece, and this is extremely valuable. If you can actually act as that third defenseman on the ice, you can shut down teams' offensive strategies. But the fact is that Askarov would frequently come out and then almost like freeze in these positions, where it would create this chaos and this uncertainty in the Sharks' defensive zone that just wasn't really a great thing. It wouldn't always backfire, but occasionally it would. We saw Askarov, in fact, the first goal that he gave up as a San Jose Sharks goaltender mere seconds into the game was because he misplayed the puck while handling it behind the net against the St. Louis Blues. This is something that he will have to correct, but one thing that truly works in Askarov's favor and what makes him truly a special goaltending prospect is his athleticism. The way he moves in the crease is really something to see. Kind of reminds you a little bit of like a Jonathan Quick, goaltender for the Los Angeles Kings, who managed to win a couple of Stanley Cups with them. So Askarov, I do believe, has that potential. When it comes to Sam Dickinson at number 1, I remember when the Sharks drafted Dickinson this past offseason 2024, the first game action that we saw with him with the Sharks organization, not counting development camp, was at the rookie face-off tournament, and the first thing that came to mind as a comparison for Dickinson was absolutely Brent Burns. He just had Brent Burns written all over him, and this is a great thing. Obviously, Brent Burns was a fantastic defenseman, won a James Norris as literally the league's best defenseman in one of those years, but they both have that size, but also they move well with it. Offensively, they have some strong instincts there. They can get pucks through, good one-timer, solid passing ability, and even defensively, they can make some great reads and eat a ton of minutes and be rather reliable. But at the same time, there are those moments where Brent Burns would leave you scratching your head and wondering what exactly he was thinking as he just gives the puck away or is completely out of position, and Sam Dickinson is very similar. I watched him at the Memorial Cup this season. He was the best defenseman in the Memorial Cup. In fact, you could argue he was the best defenseman in the entire OHL this season. Pretty close with Zane Parik, but there are definitely arguments to go in Sam Dickinson's favor. And yet, there were also moments in that Memorial Cup in which he would make these crazy big mistakes. Think of the one game that the London Knights actually lost, which was to Medicine Hat in the round robin. The game winner that Medicine Hat scored was because Sam Dickinson completely dropped coverage of his man, allowing him to move to the front of the net and find this goal. There was another moment in the final game against Medicine Hat, which was the championship game, the final 30 seconds. This is a situation where London had a 3-goal lead at this point, so perhaps Sam Dickinson had his mind on the prize and wasn't fully locked in and ready to play defense, but he again found himself completely out of position, allowing for almost a really great chance for Medicine Hat to form. So these are the types of mistakes that do need to be cleaned up, because if you are making them in the NHL, that's going to usually end up in the back of your net, and singular goals can be the difference maker, especially in the playoffs between wins and losses, and you don't want your top defenseman making those all that consistently. But there's so much to love, there's so much good with him, and even defensively, like 90% of the time, he's still able to make really, really strong plays. And so he certainly pans out at the very least as like a middle pairing defenseman who can take up a ton of minutes, but perhaps at his best as that top pairing guy who really rounds together a Sharks defensive core. And so he does end up as their top prospect currently, but all of that could change within the next couple of weeks. The draft is quickly approaching. The Sharks not only have the second overall pick, but then a late first, an early second, a mid-second. All of these players will be further added to already one of, if not the best prospect pools in the entire NHL. So the future is very bright for this team. Class dismissed.